Welcome to Discuss With Us podcast, where we are unpacking the world through a Christian lens. I am your host, Darcy Durkowski, along with my husband, Brian, and our intention is to pose topics, trending and otherwise, and unpack them with the help of some research, insights from our different backgrounds, and even some listener input in a way that is thought-provoking and entertaining. So get comfortable, grab your favorite beverage, and discuss with us.
Welcome back to another episode of Discuss With Us. Darcy, is that your line now, or is it still mine?
I was going to say, it's nice to have you back.
Are you sure? I thought maybe you enjoyed it just riding solo.
No, there was a lot more prep involved because I had to transition myself into, there's a lot more outline and notes, and I mean, it was kind of fun. I think it turned out fine. But
yeah, it was good.
Thank you. And maybe we'll do some more of that sprinkled in here and there because I think it'll make our life easier here and there. But I mean, it would be nice to have you do the Sunday reflection with me too.
Yes.
But anyways, yes.
No, it was just a cool idea is what I meant by it.
Well,
simplified things instead of always dredging, trying to figure out what to talk about.
Well, and it's not even that we have to figure out what to talk about because we have that list. It's more so what do we feel like tackling.
Yeah. It's a challenge. But
it is.
Darcy picked up the slack. I was way worn out from, I think I had like 2 late nights in a row.
Well, yeah, and we had a busy
one
week before.
Self-inflicted, but one legit.
We got all of our appliances installed and have enjoyed a week with our oven back.
Yeah.
And I mean, we survived fine without it, but we won't do that again.
It's a terrible thing to say, but I mean, we at least went a year.
It was over a year.
Over a year without an oven.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in the immediacy of it, it was a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
But then we really quickly
figured out the air fryer
alternatives. Air fryer. I grill a lot of stuff anyways, and we started like grilling things.
It caused us to get some of our like wedding registry contraptions out of the cabinet and try them out. So.
And so one thing led to another, and before you know it, it's been like a year and a half, and you're like, we haven't had an oven.
I know.
But Thanksgiving's around the corner, and I like treats. So that was the biggest kick in the head was there was no like muffins or anything like that.
I think what finally pushed Brian over the edge on pulling the trigger on getting an oven was that in the fall I usually bake these pumpkin chocolate chip muffins and just a recipe I found a while back, or like I don't know, I usually look at several recipes, but they were so good last year, well, maybe a couple years ago now.
It's the only pumpkin thing I actually like.
Yeah, and I'm not big on pumpkin either, but they were good.
Yes.
And so I think that may have been a big
last year we
factor
didn't have them, and that wasn't going to happen 2 years in a row. That and you were such the sourdough queen.
I know, that was the other thing.
And that fell by the wayside.
I would not call myself the sourdough queen, but it was
good.
Proficient enough with it, yes. And now I have to get that going again. But we have already had the pumpkin chocolate chip muffins, and Brian approved. I tweaked my recipe. Yeah. I debated making them again this weekend, and I was like, we'll just stay fat if that happens.
We were at HEB, and we stared at the pumpkin longer than we should have.
Yeah. We'll do it again in a couple weeks, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay.
So,
what are we talking about today, Brian?
Well, sometimes you have these ideas of like, you know what, this could work, and then you get up here, and it's like, well, how is this going to work?
A lot of times it's like I said, we have this list of topics, but sometimes it's figuring out what angle or what all you want to, a lot of these are dynamic topics. You could take them many different ways. So, and this is one of those that some of them are tougher to tackle than you would think, and some of them are
ones
easier.
Where you're like, well, you go ahead and just take the lead on this.
That's not true. I've done a couple of tough ones recently.
By yourself, yeah. Okay, so the premise here, this is not going to be any like pointing finger type of thing. It's more reflection, internalizing things.
Well, because we've almost kind of like led up to this a little bit.
Yeah,
and
that was what kind of forced this one to happen. So
yeah, and you actually posed the question for us to discuss, and I thought it was a really interesting question. So
when did I do that?
Probably shortly after we did the politics episode.
Oh yeah, because this is all in the same line of that. So,
just questioning ideals that you may have had for a long time.
Just things to think about. I just find it interesting. So not really swinging one way or the other, but yeah. So we kind of had the political-ish conversation, and then what did we talk about in between that? I don't remember. But it was along the same lines.
Uncertainty, happiness, advantage.
Yes, the uncertainty one. Mm-hmm. That all kind of led up to it too, and so. That kind of got me. There's been a few things, obviously. If you didn't know, election in November. And then also these hurricanes that have been hitting.
Yes.
You know, there was in July, we had one in Texas. And then obviously the East Coast kind of what do you call that? Like mid-south? I don't know. Like
I guess.
Carolina. Well, I guess that's east.
Yeah, I mean, southeast.
Smoky Mountains and stuff. Yeah. They all got terrible flooding and
still dealing with it.
Yeah. And then Florida got hit again, and so there's just been a lot of stuff going on. Well, that kind of led me down the thought of, obviously, as Christians, you kind of sit here and are like, what do we do and what should we do? And this isn't to tell you one way or anything like that you should be doing. It's more just food for thought. Because I myself struggle with this, and I think that's what makes it hard. Is I'm not going to sit here.
We're not trying to convince anybody one way or the other because we're unconvinced.
Oh yeah, a lot of this stuff we're not like fully partaking in either. So we're once again we're talking about it, so you get to hear about it.
Yeah.
So I guess to start it off, the first thing that kind of racked my brain, and this is more on the political side, was in the United States, economically, are we set up Christian? And I started thinking about this after that political episode, kind of talking about immigration, abortion, some of the other things, and my head just kept running. And I was like, from a government standpoint, where do we fall on the spectrum? And the reason I thought this is whether you typically vote with a D or with an R, most of us are going to find a way to, right or wrong, convince ourselves that, like, this is the Christian way I should vote.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, that's what you're going to say for one way or another. And for people who vote with an R next to the name more so than a D, everything's about, capitalism, market economy, stuff like that. And lately, if you vote with a D next to the name, a lot of times you're more of a certain more social, I'm not even going to say socialist, but more social programs.
Yeah, it's fair.
In the economics. And so then I was thinking, what way is more Christian?
Yeah. This is why this one's hard. So I think first let's define capitalism. Do you want me to define it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I had written something down earlier. Let me find it.
I know, that's what you had said.
Sorry.
This was your part.
So capitalism, businesses privately operated or regulated. An essential feature to it is the motive to make profit. The idea is kind of that supply and demand regulate in a way that benefits society. So that's it in a nutshell. Some of the criticisms are that it would cause people to put like money over people, creates economic inequality, and then you can argue like a small percentage of people end up with the largest percentage of wealth. Those are some of the criticisms. And then you've got the benefits, economic growth, competition. A big one is innovation, which I thought was really interesting. and free enterprise and opportunity. And ironically, it's listed equality. So like you've
As
got
a
the
positive or a negative?
as a positive.
Oh, okay.
So like inequality is listed in the criticism, like it could create economic inequality, but then there's like opportunity equality
Yeah, so
in the benefits. So
not
it's
reading, just
complicated.
yeah,
Yeah.
just with my notes, that's kind of what I came up. So I was like, the positives of and again, so let me separate this. This is just America in general, doesn't matter how you're voting.
Yeah.
This is how we operate
Mm-hmm.
currently. Um a positive I think is it doesn't matter where you're from, who your family is, if you have a good idea and a good work ethic, you have maybe not as much of an opportunity as certain people, but
Yes.
as far as the world's concerned, it's an equal playing field. Um, it's a lot harder these days, I think, in certain industries, but
Mm-hmm.
anyone from anywhere can make it to the top, and that kind of levels the playing field. So
Yeah.
that gives you the opportunity.
Well, and I think where, like what I was thinking about is in my industry with work, like if we enter a new market and we're the only ones there, you bet our rates are high.
Yeah.
But then, the second we start getting some other players there, competition, our rates regulate, and that's more fair to our customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I see that every day. So that's one thing. And then what was the other thing you said at the end of that I was going to comment on?
Levels the playing field. Well, that's the competition.
Yeah. Oh, and then innovation.
Yes.
So it pushes you to that, because then once you're getting squeezed a little bit, then you are looking for efficiencies and innovation and new technologies and things like that.
Well, and then one of the other ones I think is consumers can affect change more so than if the government's controlling or there's any kind of entity controlling something. If you don't like a product and everyone else agrees with you, guess what? That product's going to suffer.
Yeah.
Whereas if everybody thinks this product's great and wants to pay for it, then that product will flourish. So a lot of positives there. And I guess before I go any further, I do want to also say this. This is more of a thought exercise. Yeah. This isn't a I want to change your mind on anything. I just want to make sure I make that clear.
How does it feel to be the one issuing all the disclaimers over there?
Well,
that's usually me.
Because I feel like this is there are certain people that are going to be listening to this real quick and like, what are they about to try to say here? And I'm going to get to a point, maybe, I don't know how clear it'll be, so that's why I just want to make sure I disclaim it now, that this isn't for one way, shape, or another from a Christian standpoint. It's just interesting to think about.
Yeah.
So with the negatives, I put that it's easier for greed to control you.
Yes.
If you are one of these companies. And I remember the other thing that like really drilled this into me recently, because we've been looking at food and stuff again. And from all these things where it's like, hey, you can call this thing olive oil as long as like it's
partially
70,
olive oil.
Yeah. and you can say this is a olive oil vinaigrette and use canola oil, like all these things that we've been researching recently, and we're like, oh my God, the ingredients in this, hey,
or like, artificial sweeteners better,
yes.
and then maybe it's not.
And just cheapening products. And that is
mass production.
Yes, that's a byproduct of where this greed can take over you. Hey, guess what? If
businesses figuring out how they can squeeze or make more, produce more.
Yes, if they can cut a corner, legal or illegal, if they can cut a corner to maximize profit, that is kind of the name of the game here.
Yeah.
And especially some of it's not even bad, because
I forgot where a lot of this came from. We have to talk about this for a minute. That what was it called? Dark Waters? What is it?
Oh yeah, that movie we watched.
Yeah, that's where we went off this tipping point of talking about some of this.
Yes.
Is that what it's called? Dark Waters on Netflix?
Dark Water, something. I don't know.
It's about DuPont and Teflon.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's a good watch.
Yeah, look, it's a movie. It's based off of real stuff.
Definitely
not going to tell you that.
dramatized.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
going to tell you that I read anything about it or anything. But
Get
from
your
the
wheels
movie,
turning.
yeah. Well, and that was the thing. It just started you thinking because whether that movie is 100% true or not, it's still stuff that happens.
Well, yeah, that's what made me think about it was when you said companies cutting corners legally
Yeah.
or illegally, and that's exactly what what happens there.
Yeah,
So,
and I think another negative that can pop up here is you aren't having the most like you have to be doing something from the outside from a charity standpoint. Now,
yeah,
that is from the government standpoint, not your Christian, but just as the
right.
business is run. That's not something that's built in unless the business is already doing it. Like
Mhm.
where I work, we have a foundation and
Yes.
we're constantly giving, reaching out, doing that. But that's because that business chooses to do that. They are
Yes.
not required. There's nothing there. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's a fact of what it is.
Right.
And then the last thing I put, if I can read it, the inequality thing. Successful businesses can negatively affect the poor. AKA, if you have a product that's really good, really valuable, we see this with medicine all the time. It's not always profitable to make something that cures something,
Yeah.
especially if it's for more of a rare disease, which I read an article about the other day. It was terrible. You basically have to self-fund your own research if you have a child with a really rare disease because
Oh yeah, you see
and
that.
it's a business standpoint. I get it, but that's just a negative thing that happens. Or also a product. If a product is really popular, really valuable, we see this with housing, land, stuff like that. The price goes up. And again, not that it's right or wrong, but that is just something that naturally happens.
Yeah. And I think that one thing to note here too is like we're approaching this from talking more about capitalism, and you could talk just as long and hard about the other side of the coin if you wanted to
Yes.
talk about like, is socialism the answer?
Yes.
Well, there's a lot to unpack
Well,
there too.
so here's where we're gonna go with that.
Okay.
So I just said all these shock and awe things of like, what are they talking about? But the reason that it was kind of creeping in my head is, I don't know, maybe I'm one of the only ones that ever thinks about this, but you end up paying taxes, doing all these things, and participating in this economic situation. And it just is a reminder that that's just the bare minimum. That is for your government standpoint, has nothing to do with you from a Christian standpoint. So, I think to me, when you have that, we talk about it all the time in the government, like separation of church and state, talk about it with schools and stuff like that. We really have to separate that in our minds too, of how we're participating economically and living in our country has to be, you have to have a line on what you're doing also spiritually from a Christian standpoint.
I was talking to my mom today about the sermon that they had at Cowboy Church, and I think one of the points was, and again, they were not getting political there either, but just saying like, if we want good leaders, that starts in like raising people that will become good leaders. So it all comes back to, what's going on under your roof.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah. And that's really kind of the point I was wanting to get at there was like, it's just something to think about when we all get hyped up one way or the other. This is just the government. This is just how we want the country to run, just the business to run. Now, if you think things are getting out of whack disproportionately to certain people, that is on you to elect these people to help keep the core beliefs of that system, but not let it get out of whack. And then also just a reminder, I guess, this is where like the FEMA stuff comes up with those hurricanes. And anyone can get riled up one way or the other. None of us, like, we have no idea where any of that money that we send off goes, right?
Yeah.
You can try to stay on top of that as much as you want. You have no idea. So I don't know if there's money in FEMA, not money in FEMA, where it went, what backdoor alley it's coming back to certain people at. No idea.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, it's, you know, that's us with the government. What are we doing as human beings to help
Yes.
these people out?
Yes. Yeah, and it's one of those things because I was seeing where different influencers, even right after the hurricanes, were
Mhm.
like, here's my Venmo. I'll make sure it gets to.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are legit.
No, I'm
Like they
sure it
have
is. I mean,
legit
we all get.
nonprofit
Mhm.
organizations that are gonna. But it's like, how do you know who or what you're affecting? How do you know where to give or what to do? And I think that we're going to talk a little bit about money and greed and all these things because, again, we're looking at this from the perspective of um, capitalism. And I think my question is, or I guess more of a statement is that I think capitalism can
Mhm.
um, I guess, lay breeding ground for greed. To your
Yes.
point, if you let it get out of hand, if you've got leaders who can't, control it. Now, again, we're not talking about socialism so much, but I would say the flip side of that would be, I think socialism can probably breed laziness as one of
Oh,
many
yeah.
things.
Well, you
So,
also have a power at the top that never changes.
yes. So just the only point I'm getting
Yeah.
at is like you could argue either side of the coin. We're arguing this one
Yeah, we're
today
arguing about this one
greed.
because it's what we live in.
Yes, exactly. It's the current state. And so one of the things that I was looking at here is, because our first question we said was like, is capitalism Christian?
Mm-hmm.
And I have like grappled with that.
Oh,
and
I know.
It's something that I think is a really good thought exercise, like you said, to think about. And what I finally got to is I think the closest kind of parallel line of thought that I got to is money bad?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's very nuanced. You could say yes, you could say no, and you'd probably be right in both.
Yeah.
It's very nuanced. It's not necessarily that money is bad. It's just all the
Well, let me stop you
human
first, 'cause
involvement.
this is interesting. This is where we don't show prep.
Oh Lord.
And we're already pretty all over the place. I'm fairly certain. So why not?
Okay, let's do it.
Which, if you had to pick like out of the known things, like there's communism, socialism, free market, capitalism, which one do you think biblically is the right answer? Biblically, not so separation of church and state. Biblically, it's probably socialism.
You think?
Yeah. Yeah, take care of each other.
Yeah.
The problem is, because that you're gonna go, oh my god. The problem is we live in the real world.
Yeah. No, that's true.
So like that greed already exists because you've
Yes.
seen.
No, you're right.
You've seen socialism.
I guess in the Garden of Eden, it would be socialism.
Well,
right?
and this is where like in even some of the like Scandinavian and Norwegian countries, like in really small circumstances, it works and
even
it can
like
work well. But there has to be 100% buy-in.
yes.
There has to be, I mean, even strong leadership at the top
Yes.
that doesn't get totally affected by greed, because I don't think it's possible to not. But it can work. I don't think it can work on the mass level.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point that you made, that like in a quote unquote perfect world, socialism would be the right answer, but greed already does exist.
Yes, no, that's already
And
there.
so-
We live in a world of sin.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we're
exactly.
not, if in a perfect like heaven, maybe
We all take care of each other. Yeah.
Yes.
And God's the ruler.
Yeah. I guess in heaven, God just takes care of all of us, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's true.
But in Eden, maybe, I don't
Yeah.
know, you could live under more of like if we hadn't gotten kicked out of there. Of course, then there'd only be two. I don't know. We could go round and round with this.
Yeah.
Anyways, I found that funny, because if
Yeah.
you say that as the root question, like, well, that would be the answer, but this is what we have, and I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
That greed, that sin.
But how
is
do we
just-
balance out
Exactly.
what the greeds? How do we check the greed? That is one of the notes that I made, is like, how do we check the greed? And so both you and I did a little bit of digging, and we came up with different things biblically
I think so.
that I think we're at the point where we would share.
I guess.
Okay, you want to go first?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, um, so one of the things I spent an evening just kind of flipping through and reading a lot of the parables, which is that should be like a routine
Yeah.
practice, because it just doesn't matter how many times that you read them in a
Yeah.
different phase of life, or like just on a
Absolutely.
different Tuesday night, and you get something else out of
Mhm.
them. And so I was reading the parable of the nations that says, that's basically the one where it says, God comes and says, whatever you did to the least, like, here, you enter into the kingdom and you don't. And they're
Mhm.
like, what? Why? And he says, well, whatever you did to the least of me, that you did for me. So like,
Mhm.
I was hungry, you gave me food.
I
And
know.
they're like,
Does
wait,
it
when?
immediately make you want to start singing the hymn?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Because
It's one of my favorites.
I know. To the least of my brothers.
Thank you for
That's the only reason I can remember that one, though,
I
is
know.
because of the hymn.
So that one obviously is talking about whatever we do for the least of the people, whatever we do for the poor and those in need, that's how we're treating God.
And I think so. Right here,
Mhm.
this is where I just want to make one point, because I feel like I've kind of gone off the rails here. So, I think capitalism is great. Let me just say that. And here's the reason. Here's the reason why, though.
Mhm.
With a socialistic, I think, is that the right one?
Socialist.
Whatever. So there we are. Socialist. With a socialist government or communist or whatever, I think you fall back on the government takes care of all these
to take
things.
care of people.
Yes.
Yes.
And while we have social programs and stuff like that, like, we kind of try to do this weird mixture
Mhm.
of a bunch of stuff. But it is still
It's on people.
us. Yes, it's on us to make sure we also take care of the Christian side, as well as the what's good for the health of the economy. And I think the real point I'm wanting to get at and get everyone thinking about, or
Mhm.
I've been at least trying to think about, is how to participate in both the economy as well as following my Christian faith to kind
Being
of mold
obedient.
both. Yes, whether it's who you vote for, what you expect of those people when you do elect them to office, what you do with your own personal time, space, energy, all of that. That's
Under your own roof, like we
Yeah.
talked about.
yeah. You just saying that right there kind of encapsulates, or I don't know, at least brought it up to where I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to. That's what all the weirdness is for.
Yes. Okay, so what was some of your biblical perspective that you read about? Because it ties into this, I feel like.
Yeah, I've got one weird one that, ironically, I've been looking at it from multiple reasons and stuff like that, but it's been caught up on me, and I'll be the first to admit I didn't even realize it was in here as often as it was.
Mhm.
I went with the give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what belongs to God, which I'm just saying out loud. That's not direct quote, but it is it's in Mark, Luke, and Matthew, I think.
Mhm.
John's the only one who apparently wasn't listening
He was
during
on it.
that parable, because I don't think he has it in there. But I found it interesting, and you'll find this in the Gospels where there's a lot of overlap.
Mhm.
But I just didn't realize this one was almost word for word
Mhm.
from all of them. And the two things I found most interesting: this is when the Pharisees and everyone are trying
Yeah,
to
they're trying to trap him.
they're trying to trap Jesus, and because everyone was thinking at the time Jesus was there to overthrow the Romans,
Right.
And so a lot of the Jews were following him, thinking like,
Here it comes.
"Yep, we're about to. This dude's taking us to the promised land. We don't have to deal with these Romans anymore. We're not going to have to pay these taxes, anything like that." And Jesus, so the Pharisees were trying to trap him. So Jesus makes this. I guess this isn't even a parable, I guess.
It's just his answer. They're
Yeah.
trying to. This is just his answer to their question that they
Yeah,
brought
and
him.
tells him to bring him a coin, and he looks at it, and it's Caesar on it, and he goes, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's." And the reason I was looking at that was it started out with just interesting, trying to think of, some of us
Give
get
my
caught
dad
up.
credit here. He's the one that said this, isn't he?
Yeah, I know, but I don't remember what we were talking about then. I told you this. I don't even remember what we were talking about. But yes, he is the one who brought it up and got me like thinking about it. But I think this is where the second part is just as important as the first. Give back to Caesar's what is Caesar's. You can look at that as the government, paying your taxes.
Yeah. Following the law that way.
Yes. Yeah. But then the second part is give to God what is God's. And I think that's where, for the world we currently live in, you have to live
we've lost a lot of that.
As a good American, but also as a good Christian at the same time. And then, kind of to your point of the hymnal, it brings us to, in at least 2 out of the 3, they also followed up with, as they were questioning him, they were asking him which commandment is the greatest, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he names specifically the first 2, and the second is treat your brother as yourself.
Yeah. AKA take care of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was just looking at all of that. And like I said, given the hurricanes, all the horrific stuff going on, and it just kind of makes you start thinking like, what are we doing? What can we be doing? And what should we do? Because as you had brought up earlier on here, like the influencers and stuff like that, like we haven't given, unless you have, haven't given to anything like that. Because I don't know what to do.
And one of the things that I was thinking about through all of this, going back to like, there's influencers, there's Salvation Army, which is probably the most legit thing that I've seen that you could give to, that you can guarantee is going to go to the hurricane relief and stuff. But there's all kind of different foundations and stuff. But are we giving, if we Christians were truly giving our first fruits to God, meaning...
Oh, you're jumping to there. All right.
Are you ready?
I guess, yeah.
If we were giving our first fruits to God, aka, or I guess one of the biggest examples of that would be tithing to the church, as God called us to, our churches would have more opportunity to step in these situations, and some do.
Yes.
In a lot of, I should say some. A lot of them do, but if we giving our first fruits, I don't think we do a lot.
Well, I think the point you're trying to make is if we're not truly tithing those first fruits,
yes,
a lot of churches are having to pay their own bills first.
Yes, yes.
And so maybe they're not
leaves
able
little left over for ministries like, hurricane relief and different, and just the poor.
Because we've had talks in the past how like it used to be the church kind of held the community together and would take care of people.
Yeah,
you didn't need the social programs.
Well, it goes all the way back to biblical times. Whenever it's like just recently dawned on me what it would be like to be a woman in biblical times, where like if you weren't able to have children or you were widowed early and you're just literally at the mercy of your husband's family and what they're going to do with you.
Yeah.
Because
and
there's no other,
because
there's no other real institution other than that and later the church to take care of you in your old age.
Yeah.
And that's not just women. Obviously it was men too, but I think it was a more common fear for women.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah. So just thinking of, obviously throughout biblical times, the church grew, and the church was what would take care of all these people, really up until somewhat, relatively speaking, recently. And I just don't feel like the church is able to take care of as many people as I wish it could. And I don't think it's necessarily church leadership. I think it's funds.
Yeah. No, yeah.
And not just funds. I say funds. We're all, we're talking a lot of money things here, but also time,
Yeah.
volunteers, and leadership other than the priests and pastors and deacons and stuff. And I'm not taking a shot at lay people here either, but just the point is, like, what if we viewed the church with more responsibility to take care of poor people in a way that, like, prompted us to action?
Yeah, that would
to
it'd be a lot simpler
to fund
instead of, because that is what can be like overwhelming, is like, where do I go
Yes.
with this? Where
And
it's
so that's
like
what I'm saying,
the
like,
straight answer should just be to your church, and
Exactly.
it still is. But are we
doing that?
Are we giving the church
Yeah.
enough to be able to do those things and being involved in our church, frankly?
And it comes down to I don't think we are trusting God and or our churches, but really, like, I don't think we're so much about tithing.
Well, hold on. Let's even, because you've brought up first fruits and haven't really defined it.
Well, you define it then.
Well, I was just saying, because some people may not know where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, you're supposed to literally, your best portion, your best and first portion, is supposed to be what goes to God. So
Yeah,
in
this is
olden
this
days,
is old. This is Old Testament.
Yes.
This is
yes.
straight out of Exodus and Numbers.
Right.
So that's where
you can
were...
just literally Google first fruits and it'll take you right to Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, because I went through a lot of that scripture looking at this, and it was like because it wasn't necessarily coins back then. It was more so your livestock.
Yes.
So it was your fattest cow.
Your livestock, your grain. And this is where, so when this gets, because I don't know the answer to this, but there are some people who live more New Testament and think Old Testament doesn't matter. And so just where this came from, a lot of the first books are, it's really kind of the evolution of man to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so with Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, a lot of this is the Israelites when they're kind of in the desert, and God kept giving them rules, and then they would either follow them or break them. But so for thousands of years, and certain religions to this day still follow it more so than others, the first fruits came out in there, and this was
it was the difference between Cain and Abel, the
yeah.
reason that God smited one, and
it's just the law of the land, your first fruits. And so that's kind of, I think, really where tithing comes from. And this is why I think some people argue what that means, but I didn't get so much caught up in percentages.
Well, I think in modern
like
day, the way that you would look at it is if money gets tight during a month, what gets cut first? Do you skip that month's tithe?
Yeah.
Or, and it gets really complicated, because we won't see the immediate effects of skipping, or sometimes we do, but a lot of times we don't, of skipping, our tithe offering. That I'm breaking it down to a month, but you will see it if you skip your rent payment.
Yes.
And so I think that can be tricky, but what God says in Malachi 3:10, I had it pulled up here. Let me pull it back up. Says, "Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts," which he doesn't say often. "If I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there's no more need." There. Mic drop. No, but I think that talking about how we check the greed is giving our first fruits, and I think that we look for so much immediate gratification in things, and we want control over everything, that ends up eroding our trust in God and what He will do in our tithe and offering, because some of us, because I've heard people do this, where they're like, well, I don't give that much to the church. I give a lot to this ministry over here.
Yeah.
And that's great that you do that, but you're not being obedient to what God asks you to do. He asks you to trust Him with your money.
Yeah. So the one I
found,
I like that Malachi one. The one I went to is Proverbs.
Oh, yeah.
Proverbs 3:9, I think it's, honor the Lord with your substance and give to him the first of all your fruits.
Mm-hmm.
And then your storehouses will be filled with abundance and your presses shall overflow with wine. So what he's saying right there is, if you're obedient to me and give to me the first of all your fruits, and we're going to talk about what the first is in a second, he will provide for you. So that's where that obedience and trust, and look, like we both said in the beginning of this, I'm not going to tell you that we're knocking this out of the park
No.
either. But this was kind of what has been weighing on me thinking about it recently. The answer's right there for you. And I had one, I can't remember who it was. It was when I used to go to the gym. This guy randomly came up to me and he said, "Do you tithe?" And I said, "Well, when I can, yeah." And he said, "I'm going to give you," as an older guy, and he said, "I'll give you one piece of advice. If you do that, you will never run out. I promise. I'm living proof of it. You're not, the lights will stay on. Something will happen and break your way." Now that was from a money standpoint, and that's honestly where most of us are going to go. But when I was thinking about this, I really started digging into like, what is the first of your fruits? Money is part of it. And that's, like you said, tithing can be the first thing to go. And we're saying tithing to the church. This is encapsulating all of this, like taking care of people. If we're using the analogy of, if we give enough to the church can help
Right.
Do this for us. So the first of your fruits, that's saying it's not paying the mortgage. It's not buying your groceries. It's not sending your kids tuition, and it's the first of your fruits. So it should be the first check you write from a money standpoint. And even if it's not money, from your time, if we're talking about like some of the things we've said in the past about daily prayer or reciting like a rosary or something like that, is it the first of your fruits, or is it, oh, if I have time, oh, if I have extra money? Because that's honestly, if you want to even call it tithing, I just prefer to say donations to the church. It would always be if I had extra money.
Right.
Like I'd flip open the wallet. Do I have enough money through the week? And then some. Okay, well, let me give part of the and then some.
Yeah.
Not even the whole and then some. It's just like, well, I got some extra money, so I can donate that now. And so when I think of like the first of your fruits and what that meant biblically, it's like, no, you don't give the third calf you've got. You give the first one you have, the one that was your guarantee we're going to eat. You give that one. You don't worry about the one that's not on the ground yet.
Yeah.
You give them your first, whether it's your
Because
time, your energy.
You're being obedient
that obedience
to God. Because there's a difference, and I'll have to share this on the Instagram page. You had sent this reel.
This is where it gets creepy, where everything starts like pointing in direction. Because I
Brian's
saw that
algorithm
randomly.
adjusted for our topic this week.
Yes, it did.
But he sent a video, and it's an old video, but it's a great excerpt about 7 reasons you should 9 reasons you should tithe. But it's based on it's basically saying tithing is not charity. It's obedience to God.
Yes.
So if you're giving to these other charities, that's great, but tithing is still, and again, we're talking money here, but it can look different ways. You still got to be obedient to God with the first fruits of your life.
I was even thinking of like talents.
Yes. Talents, that's a good one. But the easy one to go back to that's not money is your time.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I'll be honest, when I get squeezed and I'm having a packed work week or something, my Bible reading tapers right off.
Oh yeah.
It just does. It's like I don't have the brain capacity for that. And that's why, honestly, we should do it in the mornings versus in the evenings.
Yeah.
Literally the first fruits.
Yeah. Well, I thought about that too. Like first fruits of your day. Like when you're, so yeah, money wise, I guess you could say the first portion of your check, but time, because I was thinking time wise, talent wise, other things. And so the first of your fruits time-wise is when you first wake up.
Right.
And if you can't handle that, get up earlier to give God the first of those fruits. I haven't really gotten very far talent-wise, but I was trying to think about stuff like that too.
Yeah.
And there's a whole litany of things you can take out of this.
And it's just trusting God to do His will with that, not and relinquishing the control. I think because so many times you hear of like donors who want to donate to the church, but they want to make sure it's earmarked for XYZ.
Yes.
No, we don't get to do that. Well, maybe sometimes we do get to do that, but it's not what we should be doing. We should be giving it to the church. And therefore, God to do with it as His will would be done.
Yes. How do we summarize this?
Well, I think that...
Normally you have me do this. I don't know that I can. I just said a bunch of stuff.
Okay. No, I think I got this.
Okay.
So the first question that we posed here was, is capitalism Christian? And I think that you look at it and you say, is money bad? It's way more nuanced than a yes or no answer. But how we've kind of broken it down is, you've got your economic system and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, or move if you don't like it.
Yeah.
You got to go somewhere else, I guess, if you're that, convicted by it. But what we do in obedience to God in our Christian life is what we're called to do. So, how do we check the greed that I think can be kind of bred by capitalism and this world that we live in? To your point about there's already sin here, so it's not a perfect world, anyways. How do we check the greed? And I think that a good starting point there is looking at, are we giving the first fruits? And trying to make that more of a priority and trusting God instead of trying to control even our budgets and stuff. So, and our time and our schedules and all that good stuff. I think that can help us to remind us, one of the things that, and I'll have to share that reel, it said, I tithe because it gives God margin to move in my life.
Yes.
And I thought that was really powerful too, because you're having to relinquish that control and trust God with, whatever it is.
And it gives God a void to fill.
Yes, exactly. So that's my summary.
Oh, that was good.
Give your first fruits. Next week, we're talking about Halloween.
I did. So while you were talking, I can't stop myself from saying something. So
Okay.
Capitalism is good. Christianity is also good.
Yes.
And it's a mixture of the two. And I think that's just what we have to remember.
Well, and like we just said, capitalism is the world we live in right now. So what are we doing under our own roofs to make sure that we're living out our Christian life?
The real thinker here is, if you own a business, but whether it's small, whether it's big, check yourself regularly.
Yes.
Make sure that the greed's not overtaking you. What can you be doing with those talents?
And it doesn't, I think with a business, like it doesn't even have to be, let me sponsor a baseball team or something, a little league team. It can be, how can I take better care of my employees? I think you have to like search your own mission and God's purpose for you in that. 'Cause maybe it's a better benefit plan for them or going above and beyond in that way. And it can look different.
And if you're an employee or not in one of those situations, I think it is important. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy where I work.
Oh, yeah.
I feel very good about where certain profits go and stuff like that. And they're very open with us about what they do with excess money. And so even when money's rolling in and stuff, you feel good about where it's going, and that's that, and that
it
you're
gives
a part
your
of
work purpose.
Yes,
that was another thing that reel said, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it gives your work eternal purpose.
Yes,
I thought that was really good too.
Yes, and then like you had summed up the, first fruits. I already forgot it.
Thing we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes.
Well, it's getting late. I thought you summed that up beautifully, so don't even need to talk about that anymore. We can pivot now to Halloween.
Yeah.
We're going to do more simple for
like
us this next one.
a history of Halloween kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
well,
All Saints Day,
Halloween,
All Souls
yes, there's
Day.
All Saints Day, All
Hmm.
Souls Day. Maybe we'll talk about Coco.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh, I forgot about that.
yeah.
Yes. Although that's different. Well, no, it's not. Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's all rooted
Okay.
in the same
Yeah.
places, just different ways to get there. Um, so yeah, we're gonna talk about some Halloween type stuff. Should
Mhm.
you let your kids go trick or treating or not? Um, as long as you check their candy, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So what are we calling this?
I don't know. Something with capitalism and greed.
Check your greed at the door.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe that'll be it.
Mhm.
I hope we've given you something to think about, discuss, because that was the point here. So,
Yeah.
if not, we'll have to listen back and see if this went anywhere at all.
Mm.
But as
No, we
we
won't.
as we have unpacked capitalism, Caesar, and our first fruits,
And
you
greed.
go, yeah, and greed. You go discuss.